Well, welcome if you're joining us remotely here for our last class of fall semester 2022. Difficult to believe the semester is almost over. And today, what we will do, we're going to pick up in chapter 15 about stat sampling where we left off 3 weeks ago. You probably don't remember a lot about it. That's okay. The material that we did cover were some of the background concepts that we needed, and they were non-computational, so not bad. On the CPA exam these days, the computations are pretty much omitted. That's because of better stat sampling programs and much more user-friendly, so you don't need the extensive stat backgrounds you used to need. I'll bear that in mind. I'll give you enough material, certainly gets through the CPA exam. So I will tell you as we go through where I will retain material and where I will cut some material back. Material that I will cut back is the more time-consuming computational stuff. And to tell you the truth, software just does it for us today. If you ever specialize in stat sampling and auditing, okay, you'll have further training on the job. So we'll leave it to then. But my goal is to get you through the CPA exam and give you a familiarity with stat sampling. So I'll do that as we go through. And then as far as testing you on this material goes, I'm going to repeat something I did last semester. I'm going to not include chapters 15 and 17 stat sampling on the exam. I'll just say the homework and the quiz will be enough. On the homework and quiz, do your best as long as you get, we'll make it 75%. I said 80% a few minutes ago. CPA exam, should I be consistent? Okay, 75%, as long as you get 75% on each assignment, homework and quiz before, I'll go ahead and just raise that to 100%, okay? So that's a pass. All right. That should give you enough material with stat sampling. Now, I used to have to teach the whole schmear, as I was explaining a little bit ago, and I used to really blow students away. So I know this won't blow you away. Okay. So sound good? All right. Yeah, let me tell you, when I thought I was going to be taken hostage, well, I walked in earlier. I guess that just did a number on me, huh? Okay. Mission succeeded. I concede. Touche. Okay. Let me go to the chapter 15 handout, which is in Canvas files, and I'd emailed it to you, of course, along with chapter 17, which we'll also be looking at here today. Let me ask, actually, did we get all the way through this here in chapter 15? I think we did. Yeah, I marked it. Okay. So chapter 15, in order to do okay on it, I wouldn't read the book a lot. I would go back and take a look at what we did the other day. Now, toward the end of the chapter, we did have to look up some numbers and tables to draw some conclusions. Now, that I could certainly envision on the CPA exam, and I know they frequently have it. They will give you the table. You'll look up a number such as computed upper error rate, same thing as upper confidence limit. So if you'll look that up, that's what they'll need. So again, instead of any computations on the CPA exam. So you would be able to do what they would expect on chapter 15, which is about sampling for test controls. A binomial distribution. In each transaction that we sample, either yes, the control was followed, or no, it was not. We will be computing, or I should say, we will be looking up a computed upper error rate our upper confidence limit, which gives us the maximum rate of error that we think is out there in the population of transactions. In other words, rate of error that did not follow internal control. We just make sure that maximum rate of error, computed upper error rate, is not too high, not above our tolerable error rate. If it is, we declare internal control not to be working, control risk is 100%, we conduct the maximum amount of substantive testing. However, if from our sample computed upper error rate is lower than tolerable error rate, then we say that's good. Internal control is working. Since it is, we can rely on it to prevent and detect errors. We can therefore reduce the amount of substantive testing in the audit, especially tests of details, which are usually pretty expensive, the most expensive type audit tests, like confirming accounts receivable. So that can save the client some money. In fact, we'll talk next about those tests of details. So does that kind of bring you back some of the material? Okay. So, yeah. So I think you'll do just fine based on the level of information you have in a handout, and we covered that. So with the homework, I don't think you'll have a lot of trouble really in chapter 15. That's not the one that has difficult homework. Okay. So if you have any questions about chapter 15, let me know. Again, get a 75 on that quiz, the homework, and you'll be good to go. I'll automatically adjust that to 100%. With homework, you've also got solutions there. Okay. Well, it is with mixed emotions, but here we have our last chapter of the course. Certainly been a good class, and I hate to let you all go, but, well, I know Lee and Josie hates it too. Yeah, just think, you could have lots more classes. Oh my gosh, if you could have a Christmas class, it could be around the Christmas tree. So, you know, little kids wake up early for Santa and they think, let me run the Christmas tree and get my presents. Well, here you run the Christmas tree, and what do you get? Yeah. Oh. Christmas present. Everything in threes. Things happen in threes. The three wise men. Oh. Gosh, I must say this is something worse than Jewish Christmas. Oh. No, one set of my grandparents were Christian, so that was fun. Then go to the house, the other set. Lord have mercy, I don't want my rabbi to hear that. Believe me, Jewish Christmas is not much fun. Okay, so I think we've got things solved. And by the way, oh, is that recording? Please be recording. Okay, good. It's recording. All right. And also for those of you online, I'll be sharing my screen just a little bit. I realized I forgot to share it a little bit ago. So I was just looking at the end of the chapter 15 notes. You can look at that on your own, and then beginning of chapter 17. Okay. So here in chapter 17, the statistical sampling for tests of details. Well, here we're talking about tests of details, most notably confirmations. especially accounts receivable confirmations. So with accounts receivable confirmations, we're trying to pick out which customer accounts to sample. We know that in most cases, we want a random sample. Is truly representative of the population, because we will use random numbers, as we'll see, to pick out honest sample. So we hope we get truly random or unbiased sample from throughout the population. So we'll see. With stat sampling, under normal circumstances, there's no way that we could examine every eye in the population. That's why we're having a sample. Now, in many areas of the audit, with audit software and artificial intelligence, 100% sampling is starting to become a reality. Whether it will in the foreseeable future for accounts receivable, I don't know, because you're dealing with a lot of units here. Try and get customers to respond to your request. So I think we'll still be using stat sampling for a while. But by the way, that concept of 100% sampling is another reason why the CPA exam has, shall we say, de-emphasized stat sampling. And when the CPA exam does change to the new version in 2024, I think they're probably going to have very little stat sampling on there from what I see. So I think I'm very justified. They could decide to be mean, throw on a last minute problem about stat sampling with a lot of computations. But I think your chances are probably better of winning the lottery, which, by the way, those are random numbers too. Win the jackpot, hey, you won't have to worry about stat sampling. I'm sure that's something you would gladly put to bed. Well, with test of details, again, our goal is going to be to pick out, in this case, which accounts receivable to sample. We can't sample all of them. We can't confirm 100% of the population, at least not realistically, because that would be too expensive, too time-consuming, and all that. Plus, try to get all these humans to respond, these human customers. So instead, we'll rely on a subset. We'll draw conclusions from that subset. And namely, the conclusions we're going to draw will be how much error do we think is in the population. Sampling gives an estimate. It gives us a range called the confidence interval, but it does not give us an exact amount. So sampling gives us ballpark figures, shall we say. So we'll be dealing with that. It won't be bad. With numbers in this chapter, don't panic. We won't have to calculate it. So I'm not going to go to that level. I could, if you wanted to come back maybe next week. Rousing enthusiasm. So I'll just limit what we cover to numbers we look up in tables. One table we saw last week when we were looking up error rates. And there was also another table that we saw where we looked up sample sizes. So we'll limit ourselves to those. So those will be the numbers that we need. Again, won't be too bad, as I will show you. So here, as we sample today, picking off accounts receivable, individual customer accounts receivable, that is, for sampling, we're going to be dealing with a continuous distribution. You may recall that was the second type of distribution that you covered in stats. It was a little bit more involved than the binomial distribution that you started off with. Binomial being two possible answers, like either yes, control is followed, or no, it was not. Or you may have seen that that was a sample of Bernoulli trials and stats. Did I ever hear that? Okay, don't worry. If you're really interested, you can look Bernoulli trials up. But here with continuous distribution, It's continuous because the dollar amount of an account receivable could range from 0 to infinity, technically negative if there's credit balance. So it's just a little bit more involved in a binomial distribution, but certainly not bad. Again, nothing for which we're going to calculate numbers based on the material that we cover. I certainly do not expect you to on the CPA exam either, as I said. So I think our little calculated risk is way more than justified. Sound good? Okay. So here's what I'm going to do in chapter 17. I'm first going to go over some background information. It will sound familiar. A lot of it we went over. I started to say last week, my goodness, 3 weeks ago. And then also some may sound familiar from stats. I don't know if you remember too much about stats. If it does, that's good. If not, don't worry. I'm doing it from scratch. Then I'm going to have an example of using a statistical sampling technique called probability proportional to size sampling. We're going to see how that selects individual accounts receivable to confirm based on their individual balances. So the bigger an individual account receivable, the more dollars are in it. We'll see how we match random numbers up to those dollars. So the bigger the balance, the more potential random numbers match up to that individual customer. And therefore, the more likely that individual customer is to be confirmed. Does that sound like what you would want to do in sampling and confirming accounts receivable? Yeah, bigger, more material. Let's confirm it. So sure enough, it's going to be a neat way to accomplish what the auditor likes. And I'll be showing you how that is. On the CPA exam, they may ask you a few basic questions about probability proportional to size sampling. That's probably going to be about it. Maybe a few questions on what we covered last week. 3 weeks ago. So no, I don't expect it to be very in-depth on the CPA exam. They've got bigger fish to fry. Yeah, it used to be the statisticians and statistics professors used to be able to wield more power over our heads because fear is power. Oh my gosh, you just covered, I came in and got ambushed. So, yeah, they used to be able to wield a lot more power over us. These days, not as much. So, I'm sure they're upset. So, from the background information that we will cover, some questions, I think, on the CPA exam. Not a lot. From probability proportional to size sampling, 2, 3 basic questions, I'd say, if that. And then I will talk just a little bit about a traditional sampling technique called variable sampling. And you might have one question on that, but I can make that pretty easy. It will not be an involved question. And definitely these to be multiple choice questions, not a simulation. Okay. So with that in mind, let me start sharing my screen here. So here with sampling for tests of details. So again, as we said, we'll have some background information here. And some of this I can cover rather quickly because we just saw it 3 weeks ago. But here in A, we're going to be studying statistical sampling for tests of details in this chapter. And we'll recall from auditing 1, the test of details are substantive tests, so they deal with monetary amounts designed to determine whether the ending balances of real accounts are fairly stated or not. So we're dealing with a real account. It rolls over from one year to the next. That's what that means. So a balance sheet account like accounts receivable. Again, that balance could range from 0 to infinity. So thus, we'll be dealing with a continuous distribution, not a binomial. And tests of details help the auditor help allow the auditor to assess plan detection risk. So, plan detection risk. What is the risk that we, the auditor, do not detect a material misstatement when there's one out there? Normally, we want that to be pretty low, of course. Simply put, the more accounts receivable we confirm here, the bigger the sample size, the lower plan detection risk will be. So we'll see how we balance that against the concept that we don't want to do too much work and make this unaffordable for the poor client either. Again, accounts receivable confirmations can add up to some money. So then B, in chapter 15, we studied attribute sampling, which dealt with binomial distributions. Again, which there are only two possible responses, either yes, the internal control was followed for this transaction, or no, it wasn't. Just like yes, the credit approval number is there, or no, it is not. So binomial, each transaction being a Bernoulli trial, either yes or no again, and we have a series of Bernoulli trials. In other words, multiple transactions. So if you're curious about Bernoulli trials, you can take a look at them on the internet and see who Bernoulli was. Okay. So attribute sampling, by the way, is also appropriate for substantive test transactions to determine whether or not the dollar amount of an individual transaction is appropriate. And we can note these tests give the auditor information to assess control risk and plan detection risk, respectively. So control risk, how likely is it that a material error is not prevented and or detected by internal control? So again, we can use stat sampling to get information on internal control and on plan detection risk. Good. So here in C, we'll be studying two types of stat sampling for tests of details. Monetary unit sampling, also known as probability proportionate to size sampling or PPS sampling, or commonly referred to that, and variable sampling. I'll show you how that can be used very, very basically. And we'll be determining the amount of error in our sample and then projecting this error to the total population, to the total account balance. So based on this sample of accounts receivable that we confirmed, how much error did we find in that sample? Then basically, if we project that same amount, same percentage to the population, then that will give us an estimate of how bad or how good the population is, how much error is out there in total. Again, I will show you, and no, it will not be difficult. So D, error. We saw this earlier, 3 weeks ago. It's defined as book value less audited value. Well, note that an error could be either an overstatement or an understatement, which would be a negative amount is computed here. And we saw in the way of terminology, error equals misstatement equals exception equals deviation equals occurrence. So just want to use those in case I use one here and they use another on CPA exam. Then E, often populations are stratified into layers, in other words, divided into layers or strata. A different sampling plan is then applied to each stratum. For example, accounts receivable could be divided into strata according to size. The auditor will want to confirm most, if not all, very, very large accounts receivable, so our very top strata with positive confirmations. Would then want to confirm a much smaller percentage of small accounts receivable using negative confirmations. So small run-of-the-mill accounts receivable, confirm fairly low proportion of them. We'll use negative confirmations, which means, as we saw a while back, that the customer only returns it if the amount shown is wrong. Positive confirmations, return those no matter if the amount shown is right or wrong. So negative confirmations are a lot cheaper. They have drawback. If we don't get it back, we can only assume that account receivable for that customer is okay. That customer may have just thrown it away. Positive confirmations, we have to get them all back and make sure that we get them back. That gets expensive, but they have better information value because we can follow up if we don't get them back, and we'll know for certain what's going on with that account, but not so for negative confirmations. Now, by the way, reading on about strata, this auditor, he or she probably would not even bother confirming accounts receivable with extremely small or zero balances. We may just stratify those out. Very bottom strand, not big enough to worry about, especially considering that for accounts receivable, the client wants to overstate them, not understate them. So a smaller zero balance, that's probably what it is. A large balance, ooh, that could be overstated because we know the client would like to do so, if possible. Now, reading on, here's another way we can stratify about characteristics. So this auditor may also pull out related party accounts receivable as a separate strata based on characteristics versus dollar size and confirm most or maybe even all of them positively. We'll see that much size-based stratification can be eliminated with PPS sampling because it samples individual dollars in an account balance, so it stratifies automatically according to size, I alluded to, and I'll show you more about that later. It's just a neat little trick it does. Any questions so far? Okay. Now in F, as we recall the following facts from statistics. Many of these we did cover 3 weeks ago, but just want to make sure that I clear up any questions here. Again, CPA exam, yes, they could certainly test these concepts and probably will. So do go back over these as you review. So first fact, repeated samples will give you different sample means. This because sampling is a stochastic process. It has noise. Thus, when we take a sample, we face the following sampling risks. So we said that whenever we are sampling, oh, and I should put these screens down. I'm sorry. Yeah, just for here in the classroom, I forgot to put the screens down. Oh, for crying out loud. Okay, good. My connection was a little bit loose. All right. So if you need to refer up here to the handout, it'll be up here in class. Well, we said that we had the old familiar result from sampling, which is X bar, the sample mean. By the way, look here at my eraser. Online, you can see that in a little bitty screen of me. I think it's a good thing the semester is about over. All right. So let me go ahead and erase what somebody else left in here. By the way, if you teach, it's a really nice thing to erase your board, just like in general life, cleaning up one's mess. Oh. So we said get to that. So in the population, we said that we're looking for some value called mu. The true population mean, in this case, true population amount of error in accounts receivable. then we will have a sample mean of error called X bar that we will find. That's our best estimate of mu. And as we sample, we'll project that to mu and draw some conclusions. But X bar, if we took repeated samples, we get different X bars. Sampling is stochastic, it's got noise. The only way that we would know this mu with certainty and not have any noise is if we sampled everything, 100% of the population. Usually not feasible, although becoming more feasible, as I said, in some areas of the audit. So sometimes as we sample, we might not get the result that maybe we should have. We might have type 1 or type 2 error. We talked about those briefly. Let me put them into a little bit better perspective here. So we might have a type 1 error. That risk is always with us. We will simply have to specify it. And again, I will show you. It's the risk that our sample results confirm our hypothesis when we would have found that the hypothesis would have been refuted if we had been able to examine the entire population. For example, we confirm a sample of accounts receivable and conclude the ending total account receivable balance is fairly stated. Everything looked great. But if we'd been able to examine every account receivable, we would have found the total balance not to be fairly stated. So mu would have been unacceptably high. Only way we know mu again, if we sample everything. So mu would be high, but X bar would be low. We got a good draw of the cards. It's type 1 error. Well, type 1 error thus increases the auditor's business risk. And type 1 error is also called acceptable risk of over-reliance, especially when pertaining to internal control, or the acceptable risk of incorrect acceptance, especially when pertaining to test of details. And the auditing standards also refer to the type 1 error by the confusing acronym ARACR, acceptable risk assessing control risk. Seems like there should be a TL on there. Anyway, type 1 error, everything looked good in our sample. True population, not good. So we'll be given a percentage of type 1 error that this auditor, in their best judgment, has decided to accept. Now type 2 error. That's the risk that our sample results refute our hypothesis when we would have found the hypothesis would have been confirmed if we had been able to examine the entire population. For example, we confirm a sample of accounts receivable. We conclude the ending total accounts receivable balance to be not fairly stated. But if we'd been able to examine every account receivable, we would have found that the total balance would have been fairly stated. Type 2 error thus has the potential of reducing audit efficiency. Type 2 error is also called the acceptable risk of under-reliance, especially when pertaining to internal control, or the acceptable risk of incorrect rejection, especially when pertaining to tests of details. So, exact opposite of type 1 error. So here in type 2 error, X bar is really high because we drew a bad draw of the cards as we sampled. We just happened to draw a whole bunch of misstated accounts receivable, and it made the population of accounts receivable look bad. But if we'd been able to examine every single customer, we would have found things not to be so bad in the entire population. Mu would be acceptably low to the auditor. But because of this bad luck we got in sample, mu looked as though it would be quite high, unacceptably high. We concluded accounts receivable not to be fairly stated. So, as we said 3 weeks ago, unless we sample everything in the entire population, we always have some risk that our sample results are off. In other words, we have a type 1 or type 2 error. We'll see we simply specify how much type 1 and type 2 error that this auditor is willing to accept. By the way, it's more important that you understand the concept of sampling error, type 1 and type 2 errors. The number that is decided by the auditor is not to us. It's always given to us. Again, I will show you. So that's why if I elaborate a little bit more and see, well, the auditor must specify how much of each of these risks he or she is willing to accept when applying the sample. And if faced with a scenario regarding type 1 error, the auditor must be able to document sound sample planning, etc., in order to refute any claims of lack of due care. And after all, neither type of sampling error reflects negligence on the part of the auditor. The sampling risks are simply an inherent part of any type of sampling. And both types of sampling can be reduced by taking a larger sample, as we'll see in sampling tables after a while. In fact, the only way to reduce both risks to zero is to sample every single item in the population. Said in lots of areas of sampling now, certainly would not be feasible. For example, we used the idea of drawing blood from a patient. We are drawing a blood sample as the patient's labs are run. Type 1 and type 2 errors are definitely at work there, and they are definitely specified. It's in fine print. The only way that we could reach a conclusion with absolute certainty, again, would be through 100% sample. That means we would have to sample 100% of the patient's blood. Is that feasible? No, because what will happen to the patient? Die. Yeah, so the diagnostic test killed the patient. I don't think that's a very good outcome. Not a very realistic one. So yeah, it's a sad fact of life. Sampling just is not totally precise. Now, number 2, the sample mean, this X bar. We know it's a point estimate, which will project the entire population. And we must form a confidence interval around this mean to reflect the stochastic nature of sampling. That there's some noise. We take repeated samples, we get different sample means each time. And this confidence interval, we will see, I will draw it for you, is actually an allowance for sampling error. And you normally calculate it in your stat scores by multiplying the standard deviation of the sample by a z-score. You looked one up. And doing so, we must express the confidence level in percentage terms, which is 1 minus the acceptable risk of type 1 error. And use this confidence level to look up the appropriate z-score back in stats. You may recall that you had panels to the tables of sample sizes of either 5% alpha risk or risk of type 1 error, or go lower, 1% alpha risk, or go higher, 10% alpha risk. So remember, alpha risk or risk of type 1 error, you looked up a z-score, either 1%, 5%, or 10%, except for risk of type 1 error. Then you multiply the standard deviation sample that you determined, you have to calculate that as pain, by that z-score to form a confidence interval. So I'm going to do a really simple. Just want you to understand the basics. So here on the handout, let's assume that we sample 200 accounts receivable out of a population of 5,000 accounts receivable for a client with book values of 4,500 and 1.5 million respectively. And we confirmed the sample of accounts receivable and concluded their appropriate audited value was 42,000. Thus, the amount of error in our sample is 3,000. The book value is overstated. It was 45,000, and the correct audited value of accounts receivable is 42,000. So this 3,000 of error in the population. We can project this error over the population as follows. $3,000, dollar amount of error or misstatement, out of a total value for the sample of 45,000. That's the book value of the sample. So on average, we're saying the accounts receivable are overstated by 1/15. Project that the entire population of 1.5 million. We would then believe that the entire population of accounts receivable is overstated by 100,000. Is that making sense? I'll draw the confidence interval here on the board to show you. So let me come back live. You're watching me remotely. There. Oops, battery's running low. Bear with me a second. Okay. So this confidence interval a little bit of the battery fan for online. I apologize. Should go off in a moment. All right. So you spent lots of time doing this in statistics. You remember why. And you placed your X bar, which in this case is 100,000. On this number line. So you said, here's X bar. Here is our best estimate. Excuse me, just want to make sure the camera's okay. Here's our best estimate of the true population value or mu. We think that the population of accounts receivable is overstated by 100,000. That's based on this one sample. If we took another sample, we would get something a little bit different than 100,000. Take a third sample, something a little bit different still, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we would find one of the neat things, central limit theorem, talking about it, was that over time, those mu's we would get would center or cluster around this 100,000. How much more? How much less can we expect? That's where we drew the confidence. So I'm doing 100,000. Extend it up to a peak like that. And we said thanks central limit theorem that these sample means, these X bars of time as we sample would cluster or center around 100. Nice symmetrical distribution. So when we calculated the standard error in the sample and multiplied by the relevant z-score, we came up with an allowance for sampling error. I'll assume you all remember how to do that perfectly from stats. I don't have a table today. But as we did so, we came up with a lower confidence limit and an upper confidence limit. Here is how much error we think is in the population. Here is how little error we think is in the population. In other words, we think that mu lies within those bands. So if I read on here on the handout, back to the handout, Line. Screen. There we go. Okay. So if I read this paragraph here, starting with thus based. So thus based on our sample, population of accounts receivable appears to be overstated by $100,000. True. Of course, repeated samples would give us slightly different sample results, again, due to the stochastic nature of sample. We must thus form a confidence interval around our estimate to reflect an allowance for sampling error. Let's assume this auditor accepted and accept the risk of type 1 error. Acronyms for it, that's okay, of 10%. And the sample standard deviation, or standard error, multiplied by the appropriate z-score is $5,000. Thus, we believe the true range of error in the population, based on our sample, is within $5,000 of $100,000, or from $95,000 to $105,000. Okay, so back in stats, you calculated the standard deviation or standard error of the sample, measure of variability. You looked up your z-score in a table and you multiplied the two. Do you kind of remember doing that? Okay. We're going to assume we did, and lo and behold, that allowance for sampling error is 5,000. It's easy. So we think that mu is within $5,000 of this $100,000 X bar or sample mean of error. Well, therefore, if we add and subtract, we get a lower confidence limit of $95,000, an upper confidence limit of $105,000. You think mu somewhere in there? For sure, unless we sample 100% of the population. Like that. Stats can cause some fear. And well, here at the end of the semester, I can sense you all are especially prone to it. Wonder why. All right. So as we read on here in G, in performing tests of details, the lower figure, the 95,000, is called the lower misstatement bound. Same thing as lower error bound, same thing as lower confidence limit, all the same things. So the least amount of error in the population, while the upper figure, 105,000, is called the upper misstatement bound or upper error bound or upper confidence limit. How much error we think is out there in the population. And the auditor will compare these to the tolerable misstatement. He or she is willing to accept an accounts receivable. See more about the tolerable misstatement later, and it's based on materiality. It is a judgment as to how much error this auditor will accept in the population. So, in this case, let me stop the share and come back to the board if you're online. Come across real well, but in this case, as long as the auditor has decided, the auditor's professional judgment, yes, it has been on the CPA exam, this auditor's decided the tolerable misstatement, how much misstatement that person will accept. That tolerable misstatement is 105,000 for refund. This population is fairly stable because we think, based on these results, the least amount of error that's in the population is $95,000 of misstatement. The greatest amount is $105,000 of misstatement. So as long as this auditor is willing to accept or tolerate any misstatement of $105,000 or more, accounts receivable are fairly stable. accounts receivable, $105,000, or I'm sorry, tolerable misstatement, $105,000 or less. Accounts receivable are fairly stable. Tolerable misstatement is greater than 105,000. And pardon me. I knew something was off. Scratch that one. Let me go back. I should have reversed my sign here. Okay. Here we go. You see, get flipped around like that. Don't do it because they may trick you into an CPA exam. All right. Under 5, that tolerable misstatement is greater than or equal to 105,000. Accounts receivable are fairly stable because the amount of error in the population is 105,000 or less. That's acceptable. But if there's more error in the population, let's say the tolerable mistake is less than $105,000. In that case, accounts receivable will stay. That's because we're only willing to accept up to $105,000 of tolerable estate in the population. But it looks like there's potentially more misstate in the population than 105,000. Population is probably too messed up. That makes sense. All right. So any questions about those concepts so far? So now let me put this stuff to work with an example. So I'm going to put it to work with a probability proportionate to size or monetary unit sampling procedure. An example of that. Again, same sampling technique is just, well, two different terms for it. So here's what we're always going to do. I've got procedures that we will go through here in italics, and I've got what happens in the case of our specific audit there below. So here in A, first thing we've got to do in sampling is state the objectives of the audit test. I'm sorry if you're online here, let me come back and share my screen. See where I am in the handout. There we go. So in our case, our objective is to determine whether the ending account receivable balance is fairly stated or not. We will thus estimate the error in the total ending accounts receivable balance by confirming a sample of accounts receivable. So if there's potentially too much error in the population, not fairly stated, bad. B will decide if audit sampling applies. You can assume it will, so ignore what's below there. C will define those statement conditions. Well, an individual account receivable will be misstated if its book value does not equal its audited value. And the audited value is determined through analyzing the confirmations returned by the client's customers. So shall we say the audited value is the correct value? That's not really the best term to use, but it's the correct value. The book value is what the clients report. Unfortunately, that book value may be misstated. So the difference between the audited value and the book value is the amount of error, the amount of misstatement. Then the next thing we'll do in sampling is define the population. Well, this would be recorded accounts receivable for this audit period. Now, we cannot sample unrecorded accounts receivable as we draw the sample for the client's books. So just to let you know, completeness in that sense is always a potential problem, because if the client forgot to record an account receivable, well, how do we know? We just have to take our chances on trying to find it. But that's the same for any type of transaction. So completeness is always a little bit of a problem there in the audit. Now, reading on, further accounts receivable with the zero balance cannot be sampled using PPS as there are no dollars to sample. That's okay. Usually we don't want to sample them anyway. They're too small. And further, the auditor may pull out a separate strata accounts receivable, which are very large, very small, credit balances or related party, and these would not be considered to be a part of the population. Well, let's assume this book value of the population here is $1 million. Show you how we will run with that in just a bit. Then E will define the sampling units. This will be $1 in the cumulative account receivable balance, as we'll see. It's a little bit of a mystery at this point, but just trust me for now. Then F, specify the tolerable misstatement. Well, tolerable misstatement is the amount of error the auditor will tolerate in the ending account balance and still conclude it is fairly stable. Thus, total error, which is less than or equal to tolerable misstatement, is judged to be immaterial. It's small enough. We covered that way back in chapter 8. So let's assume this auditor decided upon a tolerable misstatement of $50,000 for both understatements and overstatements. Thus, sampling could determine the appropriate balance, or the ending balance of accounts receivable is within $50,000 of $1 million. In other words, between $950,000 and $1,050,000. Sorry if you're online. And the auditor would conclude the accounts receivable are fairly safe without further adjustment because there's $50,000 or less of error. But in some cases, an auditor may decide on different tolerable statements for understatements and overstatements, just to let you know. Well, then G, next thing we'll do is specify the acceptable risk of incorrect acceptance or of type 1 error. Well, the auditor is one who decides on how much of this to accept. He'll be lower for high-risk clients, such as ACC clients, because we don't want to accept much of a chance there. That's one of the biggest factors there is into the auditor's judgment. But in the end, I'm not concerned with the percentage. That's what the auditor decides. We'll just take that percentage and go with it in the table, which I will show you. Old familiar table from 3 weeks ago for sample size. All right. So let's assume this auditor decided upon an acceptable risk of incorrect acceptance or a type 1 error of 5%. Then H, we'll estimate the amount of misstatement in the population. In other words, the expected population error rate. We did see that 3 weeks ago, but this number will be needed to determine sample size. It may be based on last year's audit or on pilot samples, just a little rough sample that we take, haphazard sample. Just a rough idea. Let's assume this auditor estimates that it's 1%. Then I, finally, after all that stuff, let's determine the initial sample size. We're going to refer to table 15.8 on page 508. Get this up here for you. Do so here. If you're still online,
yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Oh, thanks, Gotcha. So just calling up our textbook here. It does me absolutely no good to have it all ready for you before class because it boots me out just in like 5 minutes. Oops.
Is that the computer?
Pardon? I know. I'm able to fix it now. And you saw him give me my new computer. Oh. I'm sorry, which page should I say? Five oh eight. Okay. Really do like checking out. Alrighty. Now, here is the table. We look up sample sizes. We used it 3 weeks ago. We'll use it again today. We know that there are 2 panels in there. Top panel corresponding to a 5% risk of type 1 error. And a bottom panel corresponding to 10% risk of type 1 error. We were just told that we want the top panel. About 5%. On the left-hand side, we see the rows correspond to the estimated population exception rate. We want 1% because that's what we estimate. Then across the top, we see these percentages correspond to the tolerable error rate per se assurance. We want the 5% column. As we do, we see the intersection will be 93 for our sample size. Okay. See, it doesn't like coming back from Thanksgiving either. Okay. I know, as we've said, numerous glitches around here after Thanksgiving. Okay. Again, sorry if you're online. Just bring it out. It'll stop in a moment. All right. So we referred to the table. Don't worry about the next 2 sentences. Okay. Then, start worrying about the sentence says you'll find a sample size of 93 in the table. These effects on sample size, go back and look at them later. If I try to go over them now, I'll confuse you too much. They're easy. Easily verify them on the table. Okay. Now, the next thing we'll do in number 3, we'll randomly select the sample. I'll show you how. It's not bad. It will involve randomly selecting individual dollars out of the cumulative account balance. We'll recall that random sampling provides a means of achieving a probabilistic sample. In other words, in which each sampling unit, each account, or I should say each dollar, has an equal chance of being selected. And this helps lead to unbiased conclusions. So we'll assume a client had the following accounts receivable in its accounts receivable subsidiary ledger. There are only 5 accounts. That's okay. Account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are the book values. So the uncorrected amounts on the client's books before the audit. And there's the cumulative balance of these. We just keep adding them up. 1,500 plus 200, 1,700 plus 3,700, 5,400, etc. Here's why we need that last column. We're going to match random numbers up to that last column. Again, the bigger the account receivable, the more likely it is to have a random number matched up to it. So the more likely it is to be selected for confirmation. So let's assume just under that, if random numbers 6,300, 6,513, and 9886 are drawn. We would do so from software for random numbers. Every audit software package has a random number generator, and we can easily use one online if we would like. So here are 3 random numbers right there. That means we're going to draw those cumulative dollars in the cumulative account balance. So let's see, 6,300. Well, this cumulative balance, 6,300, we see is going to be right there. And number 4, just barely. So number 4 covers random numbers 5,401 up through 6,300. So, right, we picked off account 4. Then the next random number, 6,513. Well, that's beyond account 4. It goes into account 5. Then random number 9886. Okay, that is definitely into account 5. Everybody see how we pick those out? Okay. And you see how the larger the individual account balance, the more likely it is to be selected for confirmation because more potential random numbers matching up to it, right? And if you're not so convinced, just go back. And I can also talk you through it again if you need. Just let me know. All right. So we're going to sample accounts 4 and 5, although we picked off 5 with 2 random numbers. That's okay, because PPS sampling involves sampling with replacement. So we sampled account 5 one time. We put it back in the pool to potentially be selected again, and it was. That's okay. We selected it twice. We have, in this case, effective sample size of 3. But we only send out 2 confirmations. We don't bother confirming account 5 2 times. Not only would that send up our expense, but quite frankly, that customer may think we're trying double bill. They call all kinds of things like that. So we have an effective sample size of 3. We send out 2 confirmations to 2 customers. Does that make sense? That's PPS sampling with replacement. So thus the effective sample size is 3, but only 2 confirmations are sent out. Also, we note how larger accounts are automatically selected for confirmation using PPS, which is exactly what the auditor wants. Traditional sampling techniques would have sampled the account or customer numbers, and those don't take size into consideration. Thus, size-based stratification is more likely to be necessary if PPS is used. Well, traditionally, what I'm saying there is that we would have had a whole bunch of account numbers. We would have matched random numbers up to those traditionally. Those account numbers say nothing about the size of that account. Instead, when PPS sampling came out, well, it was neat because it automatically sampled according to it, automatically selected accounts according to sample sizes. So therefore, we matched up to the cumulative account balance. Again, the bigger the individual account, the more numbers around it, the more likely it is to be selected. Automatic size-based stratification. And another one of those things that is the best thing since, can you fill it in? Thank you. Good. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, over Thanksgiving when I was back in my hometown, and well, okay, we all have to have some forced family time, right? Thanksgiving, okay, well, some of that will involve sitting and watching TV, even though we don't usually watch it, you know what I mean? Well, one thing, the History Channel talked about the history of sliced bread. It wasn't always sliced. People had to slice it at home. Well, the Wonder Bread Company, they are the ones who first sold sliced bread, at least on a mass scale. So that was in the 1920s, and it was actually a big thing inventing a machine that would slice it because it was so soft. So they did, and then after the U.S. got into World War II, and rationing was in place, the director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I forget his name, but he actually made bread manufacturers stop slicing bread. It was consuming resources to slice it, plus it got stale more quickly. So people started buying unsliced loaves of bread, slicing it themselves, finding their bread knives if they had one, and trying to get nice, neat slices. Well, how do you think that went over with the general public? It didn't. So we quickly reversed that decision. They were back to sliced bread once again. So the best thing since sliced bread, that's why. Plus, if you think about it, it's so easy to grab a slice of bread and make a sandwich. If you have to slice the bread yourself, it might be a little bit less likely to do so. Therefore, bread consumption goes down and profits of bread bakers go down. That was actually a neat little story. Okay. So here in K, perform the audit procedure. Well, the auditor is now going to confirm the accounts receivable selected for sampling. And then we get them back. So in L, we're going to analyze those statements to determine their clauses. And also pass this information along to the client as good business practice. A little note, I moved that up a step from what was in the textbook. So, okay, we'll generalize here from, we've already generalized the sample population, but we have to analyze these individual differences. We get granular now. Why was this account receivable overstated, for example? Is it because somebody forgot to post a customer payment? Maybe the account is in dispute, so it should be written down, or maybe it's a bad debt, it should be written down. We have to find out why. Clients are doing something wrong, let's correct it. Then in IMP, we're going to generalize from the sample of the population. Well, this is going to involve calculating a lower misstatement bound and an upper misstatement bound. So lower confidence limit, upper confidence limit, based on sample results. Well, in PPS, The lower misstatement bound will reflect the minimum understatement the auditor believes is present in the account, while the upper misstatement bound will reflect the maximum overstatement. Okay. There will be two scenarios. First scenario is that no errors are found in the sample. Thus, for all confirmations, book value equals audited value. Life can only be the A's. So we got really good customers that we happen to sample. But can we depend upon all the other customers we did not confirm being as good? No. So there might be some errors out there. We just didn't happen to draw. Okay, so that's why I say, however, we cannot conclude the population has no error. We must thus calculate an allowance for sampling error in determining our lower misstatement bound and upper misstatement bound. So we'll refer to table 15.9 on page 509 to determine the appropriate precision limit or maximum amount of error the sample indicates maybe in the account balance. It'll be an upper confidence limit. Precision limits are based on percentages. Well, no, it's not a very detailed table, so to avoid interpolation, you probably don't remember what it was, we'll simply round down to the nearest sample size, 90 in our case. That will be more conservative. It leads to a higher upper precision limit. Okay, let's see what we're going to do here. Here. Let me come back to look. Now I'm going to flip the page, number 509. Okay. Wasn't too bad, but still slower than normal for the Wi-Fi here. So evaluating sample results. We will see upper confidence limits in this table. Again, 2 panels. 5% risk of type 1 error and 10% risk of type 1 error on the bottom. We want 5%. 5% is what our audit partner said. It's that person's judgment. Okay, we'll go with it. Then actual number of exceptions or errors found. We want the column of 0. Sample size, we would love 93, but we can't get it. The only thing we can do is to round down. Because our sample size of 93 was right between 90 and 100. So if in doubt, always round down as though we did not do as much work. It's more conservative. It will give us the higher upper confidence limits. So the higher estimate of error. Okay, so we round down to 90. Where the column and the row intersect, we see 3.3. So everybody see that? Okay. That means 3.3% is our upper confidence limit. Let me contemplate that and I'll come back here live to the board. So, 3.3%. That is excellent. We go back and we remember that that is our best estimate of the true population of error or mean. So here's the amount of error in our sample. Here's the amount of error in the population. We only know mu, the population value, if we sample everything. If we look at this table, this 3.3% is the amount of error that we think is in the population based on our sample. So we think the population is misstated by an average of 3.3%. So we could even say that if we have a population of $100, to keep it simple, we think there could be 3.3% error in it, or $3.30. That's what tolerable error rate is going to allow us, or tolerable misstatement rather, will allow us to determine. Oh, I'm sorry there. If you're online, sure that I got that. I'm sorry. Sample X bar, mu, will be the true population depth. We're trying to estimate it. Here's what we'll do. We'll turn to a confidence interval. We'll take and draw an out familiar bell-shaped curve. This peak is. We're going to put 3.3% sample mean X bar right there. We'll say, okay, stochastic nature of sampling says mu might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less. How much more, how much less? That's what the confidence interval is going to allow us to determine. Okay. It's nice. We don't have to look up a z-score. We don't have to calculate standard deviation samples. We use two back instants. Instead, we came to this table. Now, the work's really been done for this. Yeah, we could go ahead and set up a confidence interval here, but it really isn't even necessary. To tell you the truth, they just went ahead, said, okay, 3.3%. We could think of it as X bar, or we could think of it as the upper confidence limit. It does not matter. You want to know what you really do with it? You simply compare it to tolerable misstatement. If tolerable misstatement is acceptably low, we'll be okay. Let me just show you back here in the handout. Let me go back here and share my screen. I have a simple explanation. Would you rather have a simple explanation or the more involved explanation? Simple, okay, I guess. All right. So reading this, now our example again, the precision limit is 3.3%. They actually gave us the upper confidence limit. I'll show you how. The maximum amount of error the sample indicates is, well, 1 million total population book value times 0.33, 3.3%, or $33,000. Here's the way the solitaire can think of this. And now we refine this. Maybe even scratch out what you did earlier, because I just wanted to illustrate something. Right here in the center, we will actually put a 0. because our sample error rate is 0. We didn't have any errors. Remember that? But just because we had no errors does not mean that there are no errors in the population. We simply found no errors in our sample. So, based on this result, 3.3%. At 3.3% is actually the allowance for sample error. So we build our confidence interval on that. So we get at the bottom a negative 3.3%, or if we multiply that by $100,000, that would be the same as an understatement of $33,000. Up here, it could be as much as 3.3% overstatement in the population. Or, in dollar terms, multiply that by $1 million, book value, an overstatement of 33,000. So yeah, the account total balance could be understated, or it could be overstated, or it could be exactly 0. Exactly correct. Okay, so we're not sure if populations understated by a little or overstated by a little, but the really important thing is that we compare this to tolerable misstatement. How much misstatement this auditor will accept. We have here a tolerable misstatement of 55,000. Let's kind of chart that up here. We're going to accept understatements of up to 50,000 and or overstatements of up to 50,000. Because that's what this auditor specified as tolerable misstatement. This auditor has the right to do. Here's really what the errors. Very important thing is that we compare the upper and lower confidence limits, or what we just found on the table. Actually, we're going to have to write all this up from now on. We just compare what we found on the table, that precision limit or confidence limit. We compare it to total misstatement. So, based on our sample, we conclude this population has potentially $33,000 of mistake in it. However, this auditor is willing to tolerate up to $50,000. So what would our conclusion be? Is the account balance fairly stated or not? Yes, fairly stated. Reason is 3,000 less than 50,000. If we had something greater than 50,000 up here, 5.1%, something greater than that, then we'd be in trouble, not fairly stated. As it is, both the upper and lower confidence limits are within the bounds of tolerable misstatement. Great. Fairly stated. Everybody see why? Okay. Good. Trying to think about how to get to that. Oh, I'm sorry. Line there. Let me do that once again. You can see a little window by showing you now the bigger window. So again, we have 3.3% on our table. So based on this sample error rate, sample mean, no errors, sample error rate of 0, well, now we still have some error. is 3.3%. Tells us that we may still have up to 3.3% of error in the population. We could have misstatements of up to 33,000. The account balance could be understated by 33,000 or overstated by up to 33,000. We know again it's if we sample everything. So there's potentially up to 3.3% or $33,000 error in the population. That's great though. We compare that tolerable misstatement of 50,000, which the owner is willing to accept. It's a lot less good. Potential error is a lot less. As long as both, should label these, a lower confidence limit and upper confidence limits are 50,000 or less, you know we're okay. If one of them is more, then the population is not fairly stated. But in our case, fairly stated, potentially up to $33,000 from a statement of the population, we're willing to accept up to 50,000. That's good. Let me print it in. I don't want to have you draw this. Okay. Now, second scenario would be if errors are found. Let me just tell you conceptually what will happen. If so, if errors are found, the upper and or lower confidence limits will start to push out. They will get to be bigger in absolute value. Therefore, potentially pushing beyond the limits of tolerable misstatement. So as we find errors, these lower and upper confidence limits push out, in other words, get bigger in absolute value terms. They are more likely in that case to exceed tolerable misstatement. Or the account is more likely to be not fairly stated. That's it in a nutshell. If you really want to convince yourself of that, you can go back and go through the notes when you have a moment and look at all the numbers. No, I don't expect you will have to look those numbers on the CPA exam whatsoever. Okay. If you're satisfied, I guess that's all we have as far as stat sample. Okay. So again, as I was saying, just get 75% on stat sampling on the homework and from chapters 15 and 17. Come think of it, but homework on okay, I'll tell you why. Chapter 17, I cut out a chunk of material. Just do the homework and quiz from chapter 15. Again, as long as you get 75% on it, you'll get all points. From chapter 17, I will have assumed that if you'd done the homework and quiz, that you would have gotten on your own, how many percentage points? 100, yeah. Well, at least 75, yeah, in which case it'd flip over to 100. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and I'll give you 100% on chapter 17. Quiz and okay, seconds wait. So follow along through the notes, through the homework assignment for chapter 15 and the quiz assignment for chapter 15, and I'll consider that you have mastered sample. And yes, you will have mastered it enough for the CPA exam. Okay, good deal. All right, I know it's not easy, so, especially on the last class of the semester, especially after what you went through this morning with the leadership experience. All right. So, that being said, I will finalize our last exam. You'll have plenty of time in which to take that. I'll get that open very soon. I will send you instructions for it, but it will not include 15 and 17. I'll include only the material. Since our last exam in I can't remember what that cough was. Anyway, I will have it in the instructions for you. So it's only new material, no review material. All right. Any other questions or issues or anything? Oh my goodness. Is that right? It's only 3:07. Oh, okay. Right. So just a little bit more to clean up at the end of the semester in the way of assignments. So I wanted to ask about the assignments. If you will, prepare the short abstract. That just means just a really short, don't even have to have references, a really short summary of a topic you might like to research in auditing. And it could be something that perhaps you would think about in the capstone. Give me 150 words or 250, what was it? 250, thanks. Okay, give me 250, I'll be satisfied. As long as it makes sense, anything you want to do. When it comes to 6999, my philosophy is in there. You should do something that you like, something which interests you. So this maybe will get you thinking about that. So do that, submit on Canvas. Not difficulty, all the points. Slides, same thing. You fraud slides. And I gave you specific instructions there on the syllabus. Just go ahead and let me know about a couple of frauds you found. Believe me, you won't have any shortage of topics out there. Fraud. Human nature is green. So just give me just very few fraud slides. As far as presenting it, given my, okay, if you would like to present it, you can record a short presentation, a few minutes, the slides and the abstract. If you decide not to record a presentation, I would watch that remotely, obviously. If you decide not to, just make sure your abstract and fraud slides are okay. And I will have assumed I saw a really good presentation too. That makes sense? And I will update the Canvas screenbook accordingly. All right.
Does that apply to the fraud course? Present for fraud since it was
Okay.
one.
Okay, I guess can be optional for the fraud course too. You got me on that one, Katie.
I'll make them look really nice in order to.
Oh, good. So you'll do me proud. Oh, okay. I'm so relieved. Yeah, so the whole lot of your fraud course, well, you could do a good job. Yeah. Katie, you've got a gorgeous presentation. All right. Why, thanks. That speeded up my grade.
This is just for that audit, not just fraud. I haven't seen.
Oh, okay.
He's like, oh.
Gotcha. Well, I just would have posted your 100% in the wrong course, but you will, yeah, then for your second round of slides, I would have posted those in auditing instead, but it wouldn't matter.
I'll try to make it.
Well, I'm sure.
Make it as high quality as that.
All right. Yes, Mike. The abstract would be a summary of what the topic's about. So this won't take you long to do. As I said, deadline syllabus said today. No, I'm not enforcing that. So as long as you can get that posted 1 week from today, or the 9th. Okay, and today is, oh, okay. Oh, I'll tell you what, in the email, I said the 9th. Oh, okay, now I see why I did that last night. I was thinking 1 week. Since I just announced it orally, I will assume 1 week from today. So get a post for me by the 10th. I've got to have my grades in Monday at noon. So that'll give me enough time to grade these and get your grades in. That's what I'm concerned about. Okay. So the system should not count off any late penalty for you. If it does, just let me know and I will remove it. And then the Glyme assignments, yeah, I've already assumed she did just fine on those. So again, look for instructions for the exam. And anything else you can think of? Well, good. We've had a really good class this semester. Like I was telling some of you before it, I really hate to see us go, but well, I know all good things come to an end. And besides, I know full well that if ours didn't come to an end, Selena Josie's class wouldn't either. Would you like that for the rest of your years? Okay. Again, in regard to her class, all good things must come to an end. I know you're sad there too. Okay. Well, let me know if you have any questions, okay? I'll always be more than happy to help. And good, I'm glad we got out plenty early. So you can go relax, maybe get something to eat. After everything you've covered today and a short lunch period, you can probably use it. All right. Bye-bye. Take care.
All right, bye.
Is a question about
On the take home for questions.
Let's go back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
the two taxes, I believe, is yeah, and then please do CPA review.
Okay, in the bottom.
And then before one. And I'll be done, right? I'll be taking 4, 5, 10,
And I know that oftentimes we vary from that suggested sequence that Emily works out, and suggested sequence is useful, but sometimes life becomes shall we say. So.
and I have to take this separately, right? There's a CPA review and then so that's why.
That was easy.
The other question I have, I submitted the slides for your class, but this one, it's just this one. And for the fall, I will send a presentation of this. Right. And then the last question is, you said also in the last email that the college will cover the course of whatever we choose. That means if I have to
Okay, what I'll do is to contact Mary Christie, and she'll work it all out. In fact, she'll get the line rep and get purchase for you.
half the price of whatever it is.
You won't have to pay anything. No, and it's actually cheap enough to get the.
And I can do it right now.
Yeah, you can go ahead and you're in the class, just tell her. Like that down. So,
What can I get? The CPA review.
the one CD
The, I
reviews
mean,
the
because
whole share.
I
Oh, it's
Merry
excellent.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Have a great break. Thanks, you too. Bye.
Never know, I'll contact her.
Yes, she's very good. Exactly.
All right.
You don't have to worry a bit.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's a wonderful value of coming here. And it makes us, yeah, we're so much more. And we're a whole lot cheaper. really are. And yeah, so we're a good deal. So, you know, a lot